Wealth gap, the racial wealth gap in the U.S. I think a racial wealth gap, it does exist because black people have been behind for so long, y'all. Black people, we have been behind for so long, and it's not only us, you know. I think now it can be us because we have a lot of tools. The way I feel like this is the perfect time for black people to build wealth right now. So we need to get our financial literacy up, and we need to be working towards getting some wealth. But as y'all see in this video, they talk about how wealth isn't just about how much money you make. Wealth is about generations. So this is the perfect generation to start, y'all, and pass on some generational wealth. Black people haven't always had that, and we've always been behind. So I'm going to let them do a little bit more talking, and then we'll get back on the subject from my point of view. Let's get it.
Today is Juneteenth, which commemorates the end of slavery in Texas and other states which seceded from the Union. But as you may already know, it was on this day in 1865 that Union General Gordon Granger brought the news to enslaved people in Galveston, Texas, more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Later that same year, slavery was formally abolished in the United States with the ratification of the 13th Amendment. Hardships, however, continued to hurt Black Americans all these years later, including what is a persistent wealth gap. According to a Federal Reserve Bank survey, the average level of wealth in a Black household was just over $200,000, while a white household averaged over $1.3 million. A fresh new book, 15 cents on the dollar, How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap, examines the massive wealth disparity that has been virtually stuck for generations and details the structural economic barriers that Black Americans are still facing today. The co-authors of this book, Louise Story and Ebony Reed, join me now here in Studio 57 to dive into what you have both been telling me is a topic that no book exists on as far as the history and where it is, where things stand to the present day. That to me is remarkable. But first, talk to me about you both meeting at the Wall Street Journal during the pandemic and going through experiences that made you realize a book like this is even necessary.
Sure. Thank you for having us. In the summer of 2020, like many people in our country, Louise and I, we were trapped in our homes that first summer. We couldn't go anywhere. And so we started having conversations in that pandemic summer about injustices and equities we had seen in our lifetimes and workplaces. We were reading books together, and we found that there was no book that had reported on the Black-white wealth gap from history to current time with real contemporary people that are living today.
Louise, why was that? Why is that?
Well, you know, wealth has not actually been a big focus of discussions, and it's not very well understood in our country. You know, when you talk a lot about equality and even economic equality, people focus more on income. I'm sure you've heard a lot about the pay gaps.
Right.
And that's partly because, you know, companies can do something about income gaps, right? There's been a lot of move for pay equity, and also because that's something that started with the male and female pay gap. So the pay gap and income gap has dominated a lot of conversations. But, you know, income is different from wealth. Right. Wealth is what you own minus what you owe. And even two people working today at most places who are Black and white making the same income would, statistically speaking, have very different levels of wealth. So we thought it was essential that we put some focus on this.
And for many of us.
I love the way she just described wealth right there. You know, it's not about your income. It's literally about the generations. Black people are generations behind. As y'all seen, that gap was crazy. Black people, 200,000, and white people, 1 mil. That's crazy to me. And the things Black people just haven't had the tools to create that wealth. And I also, you know, on top of that, not having the tools, we haven't been financially literate enough at all. Like, we didn't even know what to do. The one thing that comes to mind for me with this, it has to be like when someone dies in the family. Like if a grandma or a granddad, they die in the family, you know, what usually happens? They get the house, Okay, the house gets sold. They make a little money. They go buy a car. They go buy some clothes. And the next thing you know, all the money's gone. The grandkids see none of that money at all. The parents done bought a new car that they probably did not need. Like, let's be real. They just bought a nice car because, hey, I got this money. I'm going to go buy a nice car. They done sold the house, not making any money off that. It just goes down here. Or they get to fighting over the money and doing all this extra stuff. It's just a lot of drama that goes around that money. So black people, I think, the basics is where black people are suffering the most right now. And even starting this, even to close the racial wealth gap at the basics. That's when someone dies, even having insurance on them in the first place is something that doesn't happen in the black community. So if someone dies, it puts the black wealth racial gap, it puts us at a deficit. Automatic. Money isn't made when someone dies, it's lost. Paying for the funeral. You spending all this money on a funeral that you can't even afford. Grandma passed the house on, you don't got enough money to even pay taxes on it. The house is probably paid off. That's some of the biggest things to me personally with the racial wealth gap. Black people were at a deficit automatically.
Wealth is inherited. The income you make now is something you can do about. Some of this you can't really control. And you have both tracked the lives of 7 black Americans throughout the book to help personify and give examples for this massive wealth disparity. Give us an example of one person you profiled and what stood out to the both of you.
Sure. Among the 7 people, I want to say is Ambassador Andrew Young, civil rights leader. Many people remember him as being the former mayor of Atlanta.
Right.
We have Michael Render, known as Killer Mike, the rapper. We also have a television executive and some people that others will encounter for the first time as they read the book. One family story that really sticks out to me is a young leader. He was formerly the head of the Georgia NAACP. He was trying to move his life forward economically while also fighting for civil rights, and he had more than $100,000 in student loan debt. And so the debt of student loans is a very crushing thing for many black families. Many black students who graduate from college carry a lot of student debt.
I'm glad you used that word, crushing, because it's difficult for anyone who carries that debt, but particularly if you don't have those lifelines at home that you've inherited. One thing you both take great effort to do is not to take any position of a government policy or perspective, but you do look at how government programs have at least exacerbated the problem or in some ways helped ameliorate it. Louise, what jumps out at you as far as government programs that are partly to blame and can do something about it?
There's examples through all of history and even through today of government programs that have been more helpful to white families and not as helpful to black families. So they've been unequally applied. And, some things that jump out, we cover Freedmen's Bank, which is a bank for formerly enslaved people in the late 1800s, which took their money and then lost most of their money. And we talk about the New Deal, which created mostly helped the white middle class. But actually, the New Deal and the GI Bill were not so easily available to black Americans. But we also talk about things today, like the bankruptcy system, which actually is race neutral. Anyone could file for bankruptcy, but the experience is not actually a race neutral experience. And black Americans who enter bankruptcy are much less likely than white Americans to have their debts restructured or forgiven, which, by the way, if you get your debt forgiven, you're wealthier because some of that debt is gone. And more white Americans, a higher percentage of them who file for bankruptcy, are able to get the debt forgiveness. So we have a chapter on that.
Okay, and I know that your effort for both of you making this book, putting so much...
Y'all see? And then it's not even black people ourselves, y'all. The system isn't made for black people at all, neither. It is a battle even with the system. So that deficit, it just grew even more. It's not just black people on black people anymore. It's black people versus the system as well. The system isn't set up to help. Like I remember hearing the stories of black people creating wealth for themselves, and the next thing you know, here comes a riot to burn down the town. Think about how many times that's happened throughout history. You know, it's honestly, it's sad to know that even when you're trying, something can still happen that's out of your control, and you have to reset. And the system isn't set up for you to reset. The system's not going to help you at all. Like I said, the bank taking all those people money. Like it's just, it honestly sucks. It sucks. I feel like a lot of the policies that the government put in, they haven't been for black people at all neither. So that wealth gap is just going to continue to grow if black people don't do anything about it. If we don't do anything about this, if we don't keep learning, if we don't keep coming together, we'll always be fighting a downhill battle. You know, we're already fighting it. We're already fighting it. But it's just, I don't think it's cool. You know, the government has pacified us with a lot of the bills, you know, with a lot of the handouts they're giving. A lot of the handouts. Like I say, I want to be able to help myself. I don't want the government to be always giving me something and me being dependent on the government all the time. I would like to be in a position to help myself, to be able to build wealth within my community, you know? And maybe, like they said before, that starts at being able to help people pay their student loans. That's something I've been dealing with for the past 3 years. It's paying off my own student loans. So, you know, I definitely feel with that, I could just think about what could I have done if my people were in a situation where they could have paid 100% for my college. If there would have been, you know, the knowledge to, okay, let's start a education account for my kids so that when they go to college, it's 100% debt free. And that's just having the knowledge to do that. You know, the knowledge hasn't been around in our community, or not even just the knowledge, the means hasn't been around in our community. You know, it's a lot of different things that have set black people back that I don't. It might not be fair, but it's what we're in. It's the situation that we're dealing with. And I'm not one that just want to sit here and point the finger at others. I want to know, what can I do to help myself get out of this situation? What's the first step I need to start creating generational wealth and close this racial wealth gap? I can blame the government. I can blame us not having the knowledge. I can do all of that. But that's not what I like to do. I really, what can I do to change this situation? And I think we, as a whole, as a community, if we all put that on, I think we would get somewhere. And there might be some setbacks. But we can't quit, y'all. We can't quit and just put our hands up and go down, oh well.
Much data, research, time and effort into it is to make it as accessible to people as possible. And that's partly because, Louise, I'd heard you mention that most people in America don't believe or don't know that there even is a wealth gap. Why is that?
You know, again, it's because people don't actually know what wealth is. People confuse wealth with income. And also, people see someone with a house and they think they're wealthy, but they don't know about that hidden debt behind it. We're all kind of private about wealth. I mean, you may not even know the wealth of people in your family. So people don't talk about wealth in their social circles, and the government does not release much information on wealth. And that leads to a lack of understanding about who has it and who doesn't.
What do you walk away from this book with? What suggestions can the rest of us take to address this disparity in some way?
Thank you. So first, people need to know the statistic, and we are working hard to try to make this a nationally known statistic, 15 cents on the dollar. Louise and I have been holding forums and community symposiums since February across this country.
And briefly explain that premise. I think we mentioned it at the top, but it's worth repeating.
Yes. So the typical Black family has 15 cents in wealth for every $1 the typical white family has. And in terms of what people can do, one of the things that we recommend at the end of the book with our personal recommendations is that at some point in people's lives, they consider working in partnership with a person who is different from them to understand another person's lived experiences and the issues they face in this country. And we've certainly done that working together on this book.
You guys are a model for what the rest of us could potentially do. It's an incredible read. I'm so glad you put so much effort and research into this. Ebony Reed and Louise Story are authors of 15 Cents on the Dollar, How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. Thanks so much for your time and joining me.
15 cents on the dollar. That is a crazy stat. For every dollar in wealth that a white American has, a Black American only has 15 cents. That is a huge gap. That gap is crazy. This book might be worth a read. It might be worth a read. If I was really into reading, like I was on probably about 2 years ago, I probably would pick it up and try to read it. I'm just not that into reading right now. Like I said, I'm only reading 5 books a year wave, rereading books. But 15 cents in a Black household for every dollar in a white household, it is crazy. And I think when we look around, wealth is definitely something that is unseen, especially within, I feel like, white America, because the way that Black people see wealth is totally different from the way that white people see wealth. White people, I feel like it's not always shown. But with Black people, they gonna have them chains on. You gonna have that nice car. You know what they say about the rich white dad? They got on the Skechers with the capri shorts and just a regular white shirt, while the Black person, they gonna have on the gold diamond chains. They gonna have the grills in, the nice car, house. But behind all that, you don't see all the debt that's picked up with all of that. So that's a nice stat to have in your pocket, especially when you're talking about wealth and what we need to build as a Black community. I'll bust that out in the topic real quick. Black people, we need to do better. We need to be working towards getting wealth as a community. We only have 15 cents on a dollar when it comes to white families, white communities, white households. I feel like somebody, they could really carry that in their voice and go with that and really move with that sentiment. I think it is pretty funny if you hold it in and actually use that thing. Y'all got it right here. 15 cents on the dollar. So I think, like I said, we can, in this generation, this is the generation to change that. I feel this is the generation to change that, and we gonna close that racial wealth gap, y'all. As a generation, we gonna keep moving forward, and we gonna change that racial wealth gap. If you with me, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a comment as